What's up, YouTube? We are live. I'm Aeolus, your host, and this is Reason, religiously educated atheists, secularists, and other non-theists. So before we begin today, we have a couple of announcements. Number one, we have a new website. It is thesecularroundtable.com. I would have tried to make it something with Reason, but guess what? Reason is so common that everybody already took every domain name there was. Number two on announcements, we have T-shirts. Woo! So here's our new T-shirt and the T-shirt design. The Godless Engineer and Prototype Atheist should have their T-shirts by next week's episode, but they are also up for sale on our website, thesecularroundtable.com. Announcement number three, Glenn, aka Godless Glenn, may not be with us as much as we originally had planned and thought. So, needless to say, our primary members now are me, Aeolus, your favorite atheist, Godless Engineer, and the Prototype Atheist. So with those announcements being made, today we're going to be talking about the historicity of Jesus. And basically, did Jesus exist? And if he did or did not, what evidence or lack of evidence is there to give us that idea or lead us to that conclusion? So as I said, I'm Aeolus. You can follow me at GodWorksOut. I blog over at religionhurtshumanity.com, and now I'm blogging at thesecularroundtable.com as well. You can follow our pages at facebook.com/religionhurtshumanity and facebook.com/philosophicalatheism. I'm going to shoot it on over to the Godless Engineer for his formal introduction as an official member of Reason.
Hello, I'm the Godless Engineer. You can find me on Facebook. If you go into the Facebook search and you just put in Godless Engineer or Godless Engineering, you should be able to find me and my associated groups. We have a number of them. I would implore you to join those groups if you would like. And you can also find me on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. Find me in all those lovely places to stay in touch with me.
Oh, okay. I think I got it now. All right. Yeah. Sorry about that. So you aren't able to see me right now. Unfortunately, I'm having some camera issues, but I am Brendan, the Prototype Atheist. You can find me on YouTube. I have a channel over there. I try to put out a video about once a week. I also operate a Facebook page, and I'm somewhat active on Twitter. So you can find me in all those locations, and I'm always looking forward to having new people to watch my videos and interact with me in all those places. So head on over and check me out whenever you can.
All right, and we're supposed to have a special guest coming today. We'll see if he actually makes it into the chat. The Foxhole Atheist. I really like what he's doing with this channel. I love the idea of a foxhole atheist because one of the common arguments from Christians and most religious people are there are no such thing as foxhole atheists. But as you can see here, there is.
There are many of us.
Oh, there he is.
How you doing tonight?
Foxhole atheist, how are you? Go ahead and give your formal introduction.
Well, hello everyone. I'm Randy Bevan, also known as the Foxhole Atheist. I'm a YouTuber. I make videos over at the actual channel name used to be Read the Bible. That's in the link. But I started a series recently called Yelling at Stupid People that a lot of people are getting a kick out of. I've been having fun with that. It's my way of, I don't know, applying ridicule to some of the arguments that just won't die. I started it when I found a video that a lady who did not believe in dinosaurs and just thought that was so crazy I had to just mercilessly humiliate her for it, I guess. And so that's what I do.
Now, didn't it turn out that she was actually giving a satire?
That's what she says, but I've heard a lot of people respond to that do not believe her. They think she's now covering for it. So I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't think it matters.
I
There
didn't
were
really
people who
believe that it was a
believe.
satire either.
Yeah, there are people who believe that anyway. Her position exactly as she laid it out in that video. So if it was satire, it was fantastic satire.
It was so good that nobody got it. All right, so as we mentioned, guys, today we're going to be talking about the historicity of Jesus. And I'm not going to go first. I'm going to let the godless engineer go first, and then I think we're going to go over to the foxhole atheist, and then I will go, and following me will be Brendan, the prototype atheist. So a couple things to keep in mind here is academic historians are very divided on this issue. And you would think that if there was enough evidence for this great miracle worker or the person who is supposed to be God incarnate, that we would have academic historians that were at least have a majority in agreement saying that there was a historical Jesus figure. Now, let me make sure I pronounce this correctly. Euhemerus, you guys familiar with him? He basically said that, and this was before Jesus' time as well, he said that all of these mythologies and deities are exaggerated, and sometimes these people are proclaimed divinity after they die because of their heroic feats and actions in life, that they are promoted to divine status or deities. And this was the idea. He was definitely, based on his writings, an atheist, and he had this idea of where these deities came from. So he thinks that they explained actual historical events, which is kind of relevant to today. So with those things in mind, we're going to shoot over to the godless engineer for the historicity of Jesus.
Well, to start off, I have been doing kind of a series on my channel about the historicity of Jesus. And to preface, I'll say that I don't believe that Jesus was an actual historical figure. One of the biggest reasons why I believe this is because of the lack of historical evidence for this Jesus character. Amongst other things, of course. It's not like I have a whole position that's built on this one single tenet, or bit of evidence, or lack of evidence, as it were. But one of the common arguments that I get about this lack of evidence is that a lack of evidence doesn't indicate that Jesus didn't exist. And while under most circumstances that would be true, but there are certain events in Jesus' supposed life that we can look at, and we can expect historians to actually take notice of these events. And the fact that there is substantial reason for the historians to take notice and to write them down and to comment on them in their works, the fact that they don't is actually really good evidence. So when people come to me and they say, well, a lack of evidence, that's just an argument from silence, I would have to disagree, because like if you take, for instance, when Jesus supposedly died, there was an earthquake and there was 3 days of darkness. Okay. Now, in AD 79, or 79 BCE, Pompeii was destroyed by Mount Vesuvius. That particular event is so well chronicled that we have accounts from years leading up to the event, and then we actually have evidence of the event happening. And we have specific earthquakes that happen in 62 BCE and then 64 BCE. We have contemporary historians recording earthquakes happening in those times. And then when it gets closer to actual the actual event happening, we have historians recording that the earthquakes were happening so often that the Romans were just used to the earthquakes going on. So, just for Jesus' life in general, particularly at his death, if earthquakes were to have happened as the Bible specifies, then we would expect these historians of the time that recorded natural occurrences like earthquakes and like solar eclipses, we would expect them to record these things. Now, one thing that a lot of people come back with after mentioning that is, well, it was probably just a man that walked around and he had some really good teachings and whatnot. Okay, that's fine. If you really want to reduce Jesus down to that, then you're not really subscribing to the Jesus of Christianity, because the Jesus of Christianity has a very specific profile, and it's set out in the Bible. And not to mention the fact that there were writers of the time that criticized messiahs, failed messiahs, and religions of the time, that they wrote about them then, like during Jesus' time, and they didn't write anything about anybody that could be even remotely considered Jesus. So you have to ask yourself, at what point do you really throw away this idea that Jesus existed at all, like as far as the notion of Christianity goes? Because once you reduce Jesus to practically nothing as we know him, then how can you really call that person Jesus or anything? Like, even if you sit there and you say, well, his name probably wasn't Jesus, it was something else, it's like, okay, then it's not Jesus. If you don't have this profile of Jesus being born in the reign of King Herod, and then sometime 10 years later, he's that's another apparent point that he's born. Or if you're going to say, well, Jesus probably didn't really storm the temple and cast out the money changers. You see, these are things that Christians actually believe. They believe it so wholeheartedly that they bet their eternal salvation on it. And so, with a good portion of Christians in America today believing in a literal Jesus Christ, that the Gospels are historical accounts that were written by first-hand observers, attacking this idea of Jesus is really hitting them where they think that they are the safest. And this argument from silence isn't really a weak point, but it's actually a very strong point. And I think I'll head it off to, I don't know if ALS has questions or anything.
Yeah. I'm gonna go in real quick and say, hopefully Brendan is just trying to work his camera issue out, and he'll be back shortly. But what you're making the point there is that the argument from the lack of evidence, absence of evidence, does not directly mean that no Jesus existed. However, there are some things that we can apply that evidence of absence, or absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, the absence of evidence argument to, such as different things like string theory or any scientific theory that we kind of feel like we're approaching, such as the God particle, things like that. At one time, there was no evidence for it, and we need to go ahead and clarify now that there are some things that we don't have evidence for, but we have good reason to believe. Did you want to touch on that?
Well, the reason that we have good reason to believe these things is because we make these predictions. And we make these predictions based on our theories, and if they hold true, then it's reasonable to suspect these particles or whatnot. It's reasonable to think that they exist. You can't assert that they exist for certain until you actually prove them to exist. But if you make um, predictions, and those predictions turn out to be true, then that means that there is something to the theory. And even when those predictions fail, even if they don't totally fail, then that tells you something new about this particle, or it tells you something new about your theory. Then you can go back and rework it. Now, how this could apply to Jesus is that, you can make predictions about what you would expect out of history, as far as you can make predictions as far as what would you expect historians to record from Jesus. Now, you wouldn't expect them to record his exact lifetime, or anything like that, but you would expect them to record stuff like when he was born. The Gospels themselves are very fuzzy on both his birth and his death. Birth has a 10-year fuzzy field of when he could have been born, because he was either born in the reign of King Herod, or he was born sometime 10 years after that. And then around his death, the Gospels, like the Gospel of John, has him dying on a completely separate day than the other three Gospels. And also, Gospel of John has his ministry lasting like a good 2 years longer than the other Gospels. So there's a good difference in when Jesus could have died. And so there's a fuzzy line there, there's a fuzzy line there. Now, you have to go through Jesus's narrative and pick out the points where you can predict that historians would have recorded something, and that would be things like him casting out the money changers, because the temple where he casted out the money changers wasn't like this small thing. It was a really huge temple. I mean, it was huge. I mean, 35 football fields, huge. That's how big it was. And so it's more likely that he led a small force of bros in there to knock over the money changers and cast them out, rather than him going there with his Chuck Norris beard and just totally demolish them. So as far as how all this relates back to science and whatnot, just to recap, that you can make predictions using your theories, and if those predictions come out correct or whatnot, then you know that your theory is correct, or it holds true to reality. But if it's not, then it tells you something else about that theory.
There you go. I hope everyone watching was paying attention to that, so you can see why the absence of evidence argument is rubbish. So because the godless engineer kind of touched on some of my topics there, I'm going to go ahead and go before Randy. Is that okay, Randy? Because he covered a lot of the things I was going to talk about.
No, yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
All right, cool. All right, so a couple of the things that you talked about are going to be listed here in what I like to call the proper biblical exegesis of the historicity of Jesus. So real quickly, I'd like to mention the Talmud. If any of you are familiar with what the Talmud says about Jesus, you just need to know that they thought that Jesus was a magician and he was absolutely insane. And his mother, I forgot the term that they used, but they used a term to describe her as an adulteress. So I just thought that was interesting to mention in the beginning here. So I'm going to touch on what G.E. was talking about, things that happened when Jesus was supposedly crucified. Matthew 27, verse 50 through 53. There was an earthquake, a very severe earthquake that split rocks. And if this earthquake was as serious as it claims in the Bible, that it was actually splitting rocks, then we should have some kind of evidence of this, or we should have some mention of it from historians. As he mentioned, there are several other catastrophic environmental events that happened during this time, and yet all of these they have so much evidence and so many people wrote about them, and yet no one is actually writing about these. Here's another one. I didn't hear if he mentioned it or not, but the graves opened, and people walked through the city and appeared before many people. They basically had a fucking zombie apocalypse right there in the middle of the city. Why was this not mentioned? How in the world can you have graves open up and people, the dead, get up and walk around and appear unto all these people? I didn't hear if he mentioned that or not, but that is definitely something. That is like, that is so beyond comprehension how something like that could, go amiss from the history books, unless it was fabricated. So just before Jesus' famous words, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is, my God, why have you forsaken me? Mark 15:33 says that darkness fell over the entire land, which could also mean the entire world, for 3 hours. And this was probably, they said it was the 6th hour until the 9th hour, so which was about noon until 3 p.m. Now, we know just from living how the sun works. We know that darkness the sun does just not go out. Luke's Greek terminology that he uses to describe the sun going out was that the sun failed. Basically meaning the sun failed to operate. It was not shining. Why is this not recorded anywhere? Now, there are some fabrications and later Christian additions to writings of historians that mention this, but this should have also been just as catastrophic as the earthquake, for complete darkness to occur on the earth for 3 hours. Now, if you understand how the sun works, it just doesn't work like that. That's not how it goes. Which it would have been in complete darkness because there would have been no light from the sun, which would have been no moon, no illumination, complete darkness. It would have been catastrophic. It would have been mentioned by thousands. Okay, that's just another one of the events. Now, I'm going to also talk about Paul, because Paul is the person who is most responsible for the foundation of Christianity and the spread of the Gospels. If you don't know the story about Paul, Paul basically was, before he became Paul, he was Saul. He was a Christian persecutor. He killed these people, stoned them, tortured them, gave them everything that he could do to sort of to hurt them and stop them from spreading their message. But then, on the road to Damascus, Paul, the only eyewitness of Jesus in the entire Bible, who didn't actually see him, or the entire New Testament rather, he didn't actually see him. He was blinded for 3 days and 3 nights, and he heard the voice of Jesus, or whom he thought was Jesus, telling him, asking him, why is he persecuting him and his followers? So then he tells him to go on into the city. Paul goes into the city. He becomes Paul and becomes the greatest preacher of his time and is solely really responsible for spreading the gospel. Now, what we have here is Paul, who never talks about Jesus. It would be like me telling you all about the godless engineer. Somebody used this example before. I think it may have been Richard Carrier, but it would be like me telling you all about the godless engineer for, let's see, he has 7 confirmed letters, so let's just say a 40-page article on the godless engineer, and by the end of that article, you know absolutely nothing about the godless engineer. You couldn't even tell me what he looks like by the end of that article. It's really terrible. And the fact that he is the only eyewitness in the New Testament makes it even worse, because he didn't actually see him. And the guards that were with him at the time of him being blinded by Jesus, their accounts don't even match. So the final thing that I want to point to, I'm going to include links while the other guys are speaking, but is the Council of Nicaea. Now, a lot of people thought that this is where the canon was established. It wasn't really. It was established long before that. It was kind of set in rigidity at the Council of Nicaea, but the main thing that they were talking about was Jesus and what he was exactly. Was he God? Was he half God, half man? Was he fully man? Now, if we had a historical Jesus, we would have never had to have this discussion. And we would have never had so many competing views at the time of the Council of Nicaea for these people to actually vote and decide which one was the real one. I mean, do you not get how ridiculous that is? Let's figure out if Jesus was really God or if he was a man. Let's figure out if he actually existed or not. That is just beyond ridiculous. And if you'd like to know more, you should Google it. I'm going to end here and pass it off to the foxhole atheist, unless anyone has any questions or would like to add to this discussion.
I would. I would like to add something about Paul. The thing about Paul, and the reason why Paul is kind of a bad source as far as proving that Jesus was real, or saying that Paul was an eyewitness or something like that, is you see, Paul's Jesus never exists on earth. Like, Paul's Jesus is a celestial Jesus. He only exists in this spiritual plane. And Paul actually never puts him as existing on earth. So if you're going to use Paul or any of his epistles to prove that Jesus actually existed on earth, that's going to prove to be kind of a tough thing to do. Another thing that makes it kind of a hard thing to do is that some of Paul's epistles are actually forged, and handwriting specialists have come back in, examined his work, and have deemed a couple of things to be forgeries. That people have come in and written and signed things in his name, and people have just taken it as being his epistles, but they're not. Whoever this Paul person is. There's a lot of problems with using Paul as far as substantiating Jesus as a person. There is this one passage in it where he says that he meets James, a brother of Jesus, and that is really just, you know how you hear Christians say, like, oh, hey, that's that's brother blah blah blah. And that just means like a brother in Christ. That just means that they're another Christian. And by the time that these epistles were written and whatnot, Christianity was already started, and so you can't. That's another problem with most of the sources for Christ in general, is that they were all written at a time when Christianity and its beliefs were widely known. Even though it wasn't a very big movement, it was kind of like widely known, kind of like the Branch Davidians or something like that, minus the Kool-Aid. That's all I have to add.
Well, I would agree with you there, especially. It's one of the reasons why I didn't mention the book of Acts. But I really just wanted to mention Paul because he is really the foundation of Christianity. He is. And even we don't even know that Paul existed. We know that he didn't even actually write any of his own letters, which is another thing entirely. We don't know that his name was Paul. It could have been anyone. But being so important to Christianity and the foundation of Christianity, for a man that never even seen him, is just absolutely ridiculous. And that is the sole reason why I mentioned it. We can get on a subject later about Paul and why all of this seems like it's kind of bogus to include the book of Acts, especially the book of Acts. But without further ado, I will turn it over to the foxhole atheist. Everyone join me in welcoming him to Reason.
Thank you. Oh, hello, everyone. Let me turn my camera on, I guess, here. So I want to start off by saying, largely, I don't disagree with a lot of what you guys have laid out, but I do find myself still on the other side. I believe in a historical Jesus, and I believe that Dr. Bart Ehrman has laid out a great case for it. So let me just start with the thing I've got written here. I think that we have enough, according to the criteria that historians use, to not only say that Jesus was probably a real person, but to say a few things definitively about him. For anyone who's unaware, Dr. Bart Ehrman, who I'm going to be arguing largely from today, is the James A. Gray Distinguished Professor of Religious Studies at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Specifically, his expertise is as a New Testament scholar, but by trade and application of that expertise, he operates as a historian of the early Christian centuries. For more than 30 years, I don't know why I got there again. Bart Ehrman has immersed himself in every language, every scrap of writing, every relevant figure and event, everything related to Christianity in the early centuries. When specifically asked about this, "Are you a historian?" relaying one of Richard Carrier's questions about Ehrman's qualifications, he replied, "It's a very strange question. How does one answer that? It's kind of like asking, is Lee Westwood a golfer? I mean, it's what he does for a living." And so, history is what I do for a living. The courses I teach at the University of North Carolina, both my undergraduate courses and my PhD courses, are courses on the history of Christianity in the first 3 or 4 centuries. The books that I write are about the history of early Christianity. The speeches I give around the country are about the history of early Christianity. This is what I do for a living, so yes, I think I am a historian. I would point out here that so does the college that hired him to teach early Christian history to students in PhDs, but I've got a link here. I think that popped up correctly. You can listen to him at this link to lecture on the criteria historians use in his debate with Mike Licona, where he demonstrates his knowledge and expertise as a historian in the field. So if you're interested, go check that out. Here is, let me add this link up now, the original link from this discussion, where a lot of this content I'll be arguing from today comes from. But so it's important to note that Dr. Ehrman works with most of the top scholars in this field. He knows most of them personally, corresponds with them routinely. There's been a number of debates where he's cited his fellows and colleagues, and from what he understands, they have a majority consensus in the experts. So, for example, when Richard Carrier responded to Ehrman's most recent book, he seemed very interested in chiding Ehrman for not knowing that procurators could also be prefects. Well, Ehrman immediately contacted a friend and an expert at UNC who happens to be an internationally recognized authority on the early late Roman Senate. His friend provided him with a reference showing inarguably that these two titles are in fact very different kinds of governors, just as Ehrman suspected. Still, most of the experts, biblical critics, agree more or less with Ehrman's findings. It's been pointed out more than once, I've heard, that even the majority of Christian experts disagree with his tone far more than his facts. So, in this sense, I want to point out this is not an appeal to authority or popularity. These people actually are the world's top experts, teaching, working experts in the field. I accept the findings of the majority of climate scientists as accurate for the same reason, because they are the world's top experts in the field and because they have a majority consensus. As he says, as a historian, I really don't take sides on issues. I simply try to paint out what I think actually happened historically. I write books that deal with what I think are the historical realities of early Christianity. He obviously takes sides as a person. He is an atheist after all, but like any good scientifically minded person, he takes steps and makes efforts to avoid doing that in his professional work. I think that arguing for a historical Jesus as an atheist kind of exemplifies that scientific mindset. That's at least what he's trying to do, right or wrong. To finally jump into really the main meat of the issue here, when asked for a simple piece of evidence on a plain reading that would suggest Jesus existed, he responded first laughing, "Well, it's complicated. To actually make the case, you have to write a full-length book, and so that's what I did." But he went on to explain that he doesn't count something like the Gospels as evidence for Jesus, of course, saying, we don't have any writings from anyone who was one of Jesus' disciples, in my opinion, and implying his conclusion from other works, that we don't know who wrote the Gospels. But what we do have is pretty close to that, which you guys aren't going to like, is the Apostle Paul. Paul was a contemporary of Jesus. Now, he didn't know Jesus, but he did know Jesus' brother James, and Jesus' closest apostle, Cephas. And if Jesus didn't exist, you'd think his brother would know about it. We have someone here who knew Jesus' brother. And I know the Godless Engineer touched on this, but I've just got to disagree with you there. I don't think that he was talking to him. We were talking about that. This is a contemporary of Jesus' time. I don't think that the Christians calling each other brother in that way had even developed yet. Christianity hadn't solidified quite yet as an ideology. But anyway, So some of the criticisms here, Bob Price is a mythicist who is described at least being a little more jovial about his criticism than Richard Carrier, to which Dr. Ehrman remarked laughing, that wouldn't take much, but he offered some arguments against Jesus, like he mentions Spartacus and claims that there are popular novels of the period where heroes are condemned to the cross to be crucified and escape miraculously. It's like the darkness before the dawn. The story doesn't really end with the crucifixion. Like he can see if he can get out of this, and he does. So we have examples of this kind of literary invention, and it makes sense that this was just a literary invention. A lot of that's direct quoting there, by the way. Dr. Ehrman responds, well, it'd probably take an entire chapter to show all the problems with this view, but when Bob wants to argue that in Greek novels we have fictional instances of heroes getting crucified, I have no clue what he's talking about, and I think he doesn't have a clue what he's talking about either. We have 5 Greek novels from the ancient world, a couple of which I own copies of myself, by the way, guys. He says, I teach these novels to my graduate students. There is no fictional character who gets crucified and miraculously escapes. I've never found that story either in any of them. So, but he goes on to say the idea that you would make up a hero that gets crucified isn't really the argument we're dealing with here anyway. The argument is, would they make up a Messiah that gets crucified? The early Christians said that Jesus was the Messiah, and they said he got crucified. We don't have any record of any Jew prior to Christianity who thought the Messiah would be crucified. We have lots of records about what Jews thought about the Messiah or what he was going to be: a mighty priest, a political leader, a warrior king, a cosmic judge over good and evil for earth, but not a single reference to the Messiah being crucified. The idea that the Christians would just make up this idea that this crucified man was the Messiah just doesn't make any sense. What does make sense is they knew Jesus was crucified and they believed he was the Messiah. So they came up with the idea of a crucified Messiah. And I think the point he makes here hits quite hard. They already believed Jesus was the Messiah, and then he got crucified. I think the text shows the hasty, almost desperate attempt to make it all fit what had just unfolded. This is where so many of the notable contradictions in the text reside in the Gospels, as more than one narrative attempted to make sense of it all. And this is where a lot of the, basically, they start making things up, trying to fit it all in. But next, Bob Price offers this short version here, comparison. The Osiris religion, he offered, familiar to Jews from long, long ago. You can see the evidence of it in the Joseph and his brother story. Isis found the body of Osiris, anointed it with oil, and thus raised it from the dead. But the problem in this, Ehrman responds, is that to say Jews were familiar with the Osiris myth, I would like Bob to give a single reference from any Jew living anywhere within 200 years of Jesus who mentions the Osiris myth. The Joseph story has nothing to do with the Osiris myth. I mean, more to the point, it certainly isn't mentioned in the Joseph story, and so Bob would have all his work cut out for him still to try and prove that link. But he goes on to say, let me talk about the specific... Oh, I heard an echo. Someone cut in? He says, let me talk about the specific thing he wants to argue here, that the resurrection of Jesus is like the resurrection of Osiris, and all you have to do is read the ancient sources on Osiris. The most famous one is Plutarch, who has a lengthy essay on... Are you talking to me? What's going on?
No, Randy, you're fine. I believe Prototype just rejoined, so you just go ahead and keep on going, dude. You're good.
I've got the camera different from where I see the screen for you guys, and so it's a little confusing for me. Sorry. Where am I at? That Plutarch has the lengthy essay on Isis and Osiris. When you read this essay, it's true that Osiris gets killed, but what's not true is that he gets raised from the dead. He doesn't get raised from the dead. When Jesus is raised from the dead, his body comes back to life. He comes out of the tomb and he ascends to heaven. Osiris stayed dead. His body was entombed, and there were various places, according to Plutarch, where different people of different locales argued that his body was entombed, and they built shrines to his dead body. The body stayed dead. Osiris' soul lived on in the underworld, and he became the king of the underworld, but his body didn't come back to life. It's really not quite the same. It's totally, I mean, he didn't resurrect. And so one of the other points I want to mention here is Josephus, the first century Jewish historian who would not have said that Jesus was the Messiah is most likely just not a complete forgery, and I think there's good evidence for that, or good reasons to think that. Ehrman argues that once you remove the two questionable bits, the passage reads true to Josephus. The consensus view by the majority of expert historians is that the part where it says that for he was the Messiah and the part where it says then raised from the dead 3 days later were added later, while the rest remains true to Josephus. Now, one of the compelling reasons being that if Christians were going to make this entire passage up and add this into Josephus, it seems like they would have really womped it up, instead of only getting those two little additions. It seems that Josephus certainly wouldn't have said those two things, but when you just take those things out, it relieves a passage left over that not only could Josephus have said, it sounds like something Josephus said. It's been pointed out by a bunch of experts that it's exactly fitting to his linguistic style, and so I just don't think there's good reason to think that whole passage was made up. I think it was just those two bits were added for a Christian audience. But finally, when Bart Ehrman was asked, something like, would finding a nearly original, flawless manuscript change your mind? He responded, well, it's an interesting question, but the answer is no. He goes on to give the example that suppose the original Gospel of John was discovered. He says, that'd be great. I'd love it as a historian, but it's not going to affect whether or not I believe in the Gospel. It would show us that we know for certain what John wrote, but whether what he wrote is true or not is a whole other question. And personally, I think this remark is a good one. It shows that Ehrman's not really interested in taking sides or promoting an agenda. This is just how he genuinely views the evidence of history as a scholar and a historian. That's what I got. I'm going to add this other link back. Oh, I got it up there, the original conversation, if anyone wants to check it out there in the subtext.
I do have a couple of things to add there that I slightly do disagree and agree with you at the same time. I do think that there is the potential for a historical Jesus figure. I do not think that there is the potential for historical Jesus, Yeshua, or Jesus. So real quickly, so
yeah, we agree there.
Yeah, it's very possible that there was some man named Yeshua running around at this time. He could have. I'm sure you've heard of the lunatic liar or Lord. He could have been a lunatic. But to proceed into more serious matters here, or if you're familiar with the Christian historian or writer Origen, he did not recognize that passage by Josephus, and if I remember correctly, I think it was something he was saying that a Pharisaic Jew would not have written something like that about Jesus. And you also mentioned that if Christians had forged this in there, it would have, they would have womped it up, or they would have, been a little more drastic or increased it. But we can see that additions to the Bible by transcribers, such as John 8, whoever let him who is without sin cast the first stone. It wasn't added like whole paragraphs in there at once. It was actually added over hundreds of years, one little bit at a time. So that's just a small example of how that view could be incorrect. Perhaps.
Well, I just want to point out, though, in that criticism, though, in the example you gave, the narrative of that text wouldn't stay true to the author. I don't think if when those cases occur, I think they become pretty apparent, because the type of language used to add in the words over different periods of times, the words are used a little differently, and so that kind of helps change. And so especially it doesn't sound like the original author once something like that occurs. And I think that's the argument they are making here, that this passage without those two bits stays very true to Josephus's linguistic style. The words are used exactly the way he would have used them in that period.
I guess the other thing too is that it's not far-fetched to think that some Christian writer came in and added that whole paragraph in there and made it look like it was true to Josephus. I mean, it's still using Occam's razor. I would rather believe that than believe that a Pharisaic Jew would be recognizing Jesus as the Messiah. As you listed all the things that Jews thought about the Messiah, for him to say that Jesus is the Messiah. Now this is kind of going off into another realm and not specifically speaking about the historicity of Jesus.
Well, just want to point out one more thing on this, that again, if you take those two bits out and read it, you don't have a Pharisaic Jew admitting Jesus was the Messiah anymore. You have a Pharisaic Jew just talking about another Jew. I mean, it sounds exactly like something he could have and would have said without those two single lines of text. And so you see what I'm saying? You don't really get this traitor image anymore out of that piece of text when you remove just those two bits. It sounds just like, because it's inside of a text that just lists all kinds of different Jews, mentions them casually, talks about a whole bunch of different Jews. And in that, it makes sense in that context that he would have listed Jesus. And without those two passages, he's not the traitor that he's been made out to be anymore. And his passage seems to make sense in context with what a Jew would have written about a real person.
Well, while it might, if you take out those two little bits in that paragraph, it might sound like Josephus. It is still a pretty big road bump in the overall in the overall page. Like before the passage, it says it has some really horrible stuff going on, and in the paragraph after that, it says, and now another sad calamity. What sad calamity? They just had a star-spangled ad for Jesus, but then there's another sad calamity. Was Jesus a sad calamity of some sort? But more to that, as far as this whether or not the entire thing is forged, as Aeolus pointed out, that Origen, he didn't mention Josephus. He actually complained about Josephus not even mentioning Jesus Christ in his writings. He criticized him pretty heavily for it. But then there was a priest or a monk or something in about the 3rd century who inherited his book of Josephus from Origen, that started using Josephus in debates and whatnot, and started using that exact passage. Now, this particular priest, and I'm sorry, I'm blanking on his name right now, but he is known to forge his own church's history at least 5 times. Like, he rewrote his own church's history 5 different times. He completely forged it, changed it, provably changed it. So you have the first use of Josephus being used by somebody who's known to create evidence in order for him to use it in debates.
One other thing here too before we proceed, so we don't run over the hour mark here, is that even if we could conclusively prove that Josephus mentioned Jesus, even just mentioning him as a Jew, it does not prove that he existed. Not that I'm arguing that he doesn't exist, but it doesn't prove that he existed. And based on the other forgeries of historians at that time, I would simply say that it's just a little shady. You want to comment on that, Randy?
Well, I think that if you consider it as him just mentioning Jesus without the Messiah or raised from the dead bit, that it wouldn't be proof. I mean, we have handwritings from Caesar, and that those don't really prove that Caesar existed. But it's certainly one of the good criteria that historians would use to reasonably think a figure might have existed historically. And that's one of Bart Ehrman's arguments there, is that it's not one thing. It's all these different pieces of the puzzle. The offhanded, off-the-cuff way that the brother of Jesus, James, is mentioned, that this didn't really, in the way it was mentioned there, it doesn't really, in that passage, it doesn't contribute to the story. It feels like a lifelike narrative. And when you start putting all these things together, sure, it doesn't prove, but it starts meeting a lot of the historian's criteria to reasonably think that this figure existed. I mean, it doesn't prove his divinity, it doesn't prove any of the magic, but it certainly starts to meet the criteria to think this figure might have really been a person.
if we think about what the Talmud had to say about Jesus, I mean, this is what other Jews thought about him at the time. I do find it kind of hard to say that Josephus would mention Jesus in this way. If you do remove the parts that seem to be forgeries, just mentioning Jesus, as you say, does not conclusively prove it, but it also does not disprove it. So basically, what we're left with is just a document that we can use if we were provided with more evidence that we could conclusively prove were not forgeries. And I think that's really what we're left with. We could use it, but I don't think that we can use it at this time to prove that a historical Jesus figure existed.
Yeah, I think you'd be hard pressed to do any of that. I mean, try and prove that William Shakespeare wrote the plays attributed to him. I mean, Bart Ehrman mentions that his wife is a scholar of Shakespeare, and she's writing a book about him right now. And this is a task that's impossible. You cannot conclusively prove that Shakespeare wrote any of those plays. Now, there is some good evidence to think he did. It's not a hopeless case there, but it cannot be conclusively proven. I mean, you cannot conclusively prove that Caesar crossed the Rubicon. He uses that example as well. But there are some very good reasons to think that these events really occurred, and Jesus meets some of those same criteria. And that's why, the way he sees it from the scholars he works with and knows at other colleges, he claims that the majority of working, teaching, publishing scholars agree with him.
All right, you did mention about Shakespeare there, and I found that interesting that they actually had a conspiracy theory about him, and they had a whole movie. But I digress. I'm gonna shoot it over to the prototype atheist since he's got his video back up and running. And he's gonna go ahead and finish up this conversation.
Yeah, thanks. I finally got online here using my phone anyways. But I did want to mention Josephus as well, and if I could just quickly, I apologize if this has already been gone over because I've been kind of in and out here trying to fix my issues, but I just wanted to read the Testimonium Flavianum that is kind of, the passage that out of the Antiquity of the Jews, which was written by Josephus, that is kind of referenced by people as proof that Jesus existed. And basically, the Antiquity of the Jews is an entire history of the Jews, and it's basically it's Josephus trying to state a case for them because, even back then during his time, there was a lot of animus and kind of anti-Semitism and things like that against the Jews, and he was trying to state the case in favor of them, and so basically the passage out of there is about this time there lived Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man, for he was one who performed surprising deeds and was a teacher of such people as accept the truth gladly. He won over many Jews and many of the Greeks. He was the Christ, and when upon the accusation of the principal men among us, Pilate had condemned him to the cross, those who had first come to love him did not cease. He appeared to them, spending a third day restored to life, for the prophets of God had foretold these things and 1,000 other marvels about him, and the tribe of the Christians, so called after him, has still to this day not disappeared. Now, to me, I have a little bit different, perspective or take on this. I'm not a historian or anything, but to me, this doesn't sound like he's describing, actual events that have happened. To me, he is simply trying to explain what the Christians believe. He's saying, okay, there's this tribe of Christians to this day, they're still called that, and they follow this sort of belief system, and this is what they believe about, the Christ or about this Jesus figure. So, it could possibly be that he thought that a Jesus, an actual man, a prophet during that time existed, but that he wasn't divine. He's just kind of explaining what the Christians believe about this Jesus. So I think that's really the crux of the issue is, did a historical person named Jesus or, Yeshua or Joshua exist during this time that actually did some of these things? It's something certainly interesting to discuss and talk about and consider. That's not an uncommon name, really, because when you get down to it, Jesus is pretty much the name is Joshua. And obviously there would have been more than one person named that who could have even been a prophet among the Jews and things of that nature. So, and getting back to Bart Ehrman's position, he basically likes to point out that there's no external writings, outside of the Bible in the first century that mention Jesus at all. And this mention of Jesus by Josephus is kind of one of the earliest mentions outside of the Bible that people reference. And that's pretty interesting right there, because first of all, we know that the Gospels were written decades after Jesus allegedly lived and died, and we know that they were kind of built upon each other. The first one was written, and then the next one, and the next one, they kind of used the previous versions as templates, and you can kind of see how they built on one another, and how they have some things that were embellished or things that ended up being changed, and things that really aren't mentioned elsewhere, external to the Bible. For example, in one of the Gospels, I think it's Luke, there's a census which explains why Mary and Joseph went to Bethlehem to have Jesus born, to fulfill the prophecy about the Messiah. So that census is not mentioned anywhere else in any of the other Gospels or external to the Bible. So that kind of tells us that they were trying their hardest to explain why Mary and Joseph would have gotten to Bethlehem, and then that's why that prophecy was fulfilled about the Messiah being born there. And another one is the gospel that explains how Herod ordered all the boys under 2 years old to be slaughtered, and that doesn't appear in any of the other gospels, and that doesn't appear outside of the Bible either. So things like that. And then also there's another prophecy about the Messiah coming into town upon a donkey, and they really made these strained efforts to get Jesus to come into town on a donkey, even to the point where one of the Gospels says that he rode in upon multiple donkeys, which is just kind of absurd and ridiculous. But it kind of gives us clues as to they were trying to make this Jesus figure, whether he existed or not, kind of, fit the prophecies about the Messiah and make him the Messiah. So to me, whether or not an actual man named Jesus or Yeshua, during that time period actually existed, I don't really try to argue that with people when I'm trying to, just debate with theists about their religion, as far as is Christianity true? Did Jesus perform miracles? Is he a divine incarnate deity or anything of that nature? It's not something I really try to focus on all too much, because there seems to be a lot of people and a lot of historians who think that this was an actual person, although there is some debate about it still. But to me, I don't try to focus on that, because if especially Christians, they're going to be convinced that minimally there was this person, this man that existed. So I don't like to try to go down that route with them. I try to focus on the other things and demonstrate why the claims about this man are just simply not true. But I do agree that this is an interesting topic to discuss, like for these purposes, because obviously it's something important. If not only would he be a historical figure, but he would be, the most important really historical figure ever in human history. And to not have any solid evidence about his existence is really quite striking. And I think that tells us a lot, really. I mean, I guess you could argue that maybe he was so controversial and so disliked and so hated that maybe they tried to suppress any record of his existence or anything like that. I suppose you can make an argument along those lines. But to me, I don't know one way or the other. I really don't know enough about it to say personally, but it's definitely something interesting to discuss for sure. And you guys know a lot more about it than I do, so I've definitely enjoyed your guys' discussion of the issue. And that's pretty much my perspective on it.
Well, there is one way that you
them.
can find out if he's real. We could ask him to appear right now if you guys would like to do that.
I certainly don't think that version of him was real.
I'm just kidding. What were you wanting to say there, Foxhole Atheist?
I certainly don't think that version of him was real. I don't know, but I agree with a lot of what Prototype said. I think that there's good reasons to think he probably existed. Will we ever have definitive proof? No.
So really here's the logical train of thought that I'm guessing for most Christians is that they hear people like us saying, okay, well, maybe there was a historical Jesus figure. The next train of thought in their logic is going to be trying to connect the Jesus in the Bible and all these things that he did with this historical figure of Jesus. Now, please understand that when we're saying that there may have been a historical figure Jesus, very easily you can disprove that this Jesus was God by using the Bible by itself, or you can just simply prove that he was a raving lunatic and was very hated at the time. So I just wanted to clarify here that we're not saying that this theological Jesus exists. We're simply saying we're arguing for the historical figure of Jesus. Did he or did he not exist?
Yes, correct. I agree with that very much. That's the whole case I laid out there. Bart Ehrman clarifies that point quite well, that he does not believe in the divinity. He is an atheist. And a lot of atheists, I think, felt like he may have traded sides a little bit when he wrote this last book. But again, he's just trying to paint the picture of history that he thinks the evidence shows. And so if that means that Jesus was potentially a real man that inspired some of these stories, that's what he has to say is what he thinks happened. But he certainly doesn't accept any of the magic.
Well, Randy, I am kind of curious what you think of Bart Ehrman's famous quote where he says that there's no accounts, first century accounts of Jesus whatsoever.
Well, I mean, that I'm aware of, I don't think that there technically are. I mean,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, the Apostle Paul is contemporary to Jesus, but of course he didn't know Jesus, and so that's about the closest thing we have that I know of.
Well, yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is that Bart Ehrman is saying that there's no first century accounts of Jesus, but yet now he's coming back and saying that Apostle Paul actually existed and wrote about Jesus.
Well, as far as I understand, there's been some minor forgeries discovered in Paul's writings, but I think most scholars accept that not only because Paul's things were letters, and they were contemporary letters that were later added into the Bible. But I don't think that most modern scholars, at least the working teaching, what are considered the top scholars at biblical colleges and modern colleges, I don't think there's much disagreement between them that Paul wrote that stuff. It's attributed to the man named Paul.
Yeah, at the current moment, I think that there are 7 letters that are confirmed, and I actually took a class under Bart. It was the class on Paul and the foundation of Christianity, so just an interesting tidbit to add there. But I think there are 7 that are confirmed to have been written for Paul.
Well, yeah, but there was also a consensus at one time that we weren't adding lead to our environment.
Well, true, but I mean that's the best. The way I look at it, it's just like climate science. I think that's the best example I can give to that.
That's the exact example I just gave.
It is the best.
We got to go with the modern. I mean that's the best educated experts consensus we have. That's what we have to go with.
Well, yeah, but I mean, what I'm saying is that there was a consensus that we weren't adding lead to our environment, and then one guy questioned that and gathered evidence, and then he turned that consensus.
Sure, it happens, but I just don't think that the couple of examples I gave from the mythicist perspective. There was a book written, I forget, Dr. Ehrman mentions it some 20 years ago that was a lot of the founding for some of the mythicist perspective and brought together a lot of these ideas. But he points out that scholarship over the last 20 years has taken a lot of that apart and shown that things like, say, Mithra or Osiris, that these legends aren't really the way that they were portrayed by people who advocated for the mythicist position.
Well, no. I am in no way saying that the mythicist position, I don't think that those things, me personally, I side with David Fitzgerald on this, that Christ was coalesced from the mystery faiths, and they evolved into a central Christ figure. And then that became the central Christian, because with the Josephus passage, if you don't remember from Prototype talking about it, at the end he says that they were a tribe. Christians didn't even get tribe size till well into the 2nd century. So, I mean, I'm not, Josephus was supposed to have written in the 1st century, so I don't see how he could have actually written tribe of Christians when the Christians weren't even tribe sized at that point. So, I mean,
Well, I mean, I don't know what you
true,
mean by
and
tribe
also
size. I
Paul.
think
If we're gonna kind of to skip that tribe there, because we already kind of touched on this issue of Josephus, I think sufficiently already. But to go back to touch on Paul really quickly, as he is the only contemporary that we have of Jesus, as I mentioned in my little spiel there, it's still really not good evidence that Jesus existed, since when he appeared to Paul, he blinded him, and he is not actually an eyewitness account.
well, and not only to mention that he's no better than than one of the faith healers that you hear, or one of the people that speaks in tongues that you see on TV. I mean, Paul was divinely, like, he received his information about Jesus through divine revelation. I mean, that's basically the guy in the subway that's talking to God in the corner while he's shitting his pants.
Well, I don't know. I still think that there's a good reason to think that Jesus existed. I mean, I certainly agree that a lot of the stuff they attributed to him can easily be explained with the way you just so eloquently put it. But um,
Well,
but I
and I
don't
mean,
think that I don't think that if you look at the New Testament and read the Gospels, the 4 books side by side, you quickly see both how much they're alike and how much they're so different, and I think that rushed, desperate attempt to put all this story together is the inevitable outcome of Bart Ehrman's conclusion when he says that the Christians already believed Jesus was the Messiah, and then he got crucified, and they had to make sense of that, and they had to try and put it all together, and that jacked up system of gospels we received from that is the outcome of that really messed up story. To me, it just seems like it just fits so neatly. It fits with all the evidence. I mean, you can agree or disagree, but to me, it gives a probable cause to think Jesus was probably a real person, that the stories about him got blown out of proportion.
I can go with that.
and I mean, I didn't mean to make it. I didn't mean to put you on the spot or anything, Randy. I was just kind of arguing my point against Paul and whatnot. But yeah.
No, I
But
mean, I
even
love having my
Paul is
views
still
challenged.
kind
That's
of
why I
a
come and do this kind
theological
of stuff.
Jesus. Paul is still kind of like a theological Jesus. He doesn't really paint the picture for a historical Jesus, and I don't think he tries either. I don't think he tries to. He's going off the assumption that everyone already believed Jesus and they thought he was the Messiah, like Randy said.
This is also kind of funny to me that there's so many atheists that are upset with Dr. Bart Ehrman right now, because all of his other books that they all stood by and clapped for presumed that Jesus existed. And so when he finally makes a book that states it outright, all of a sudden everybody's upset.
Well, I really like Bart Ehrman, and I like what he's doing, because he is one of the few biblical scholars that is trying to cross the gap of what the common people and religious followings know versus what the biblical scholars know. So I really appreciate that he's trying to do that. Brendan?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, there's also this perspective, which I don't know if it's from Ehrman or not, so if you guys happen to know, you can, correct me or, confirm this. But basically the idea is that, within the Bible itself, the description of this Jesus figure, even if he was an actual man who actually existed, we know that the Bibles were heavily written, heavily edited and embellished and things like that. So even if an actual Jesus, a man existed, what do we actually know about this man? Because
the Bible is so full of embellishments and things, and so we can't be certain that what is attributed to him actually happened. Even going beyond the miracles and the divine things, even the things that he said or that he taught, how do we know that those things are actually true? Because the only account we have of that is the Bible itself, and we know that that's not really a reliable source. So that's another perspective, is that, okay, so even if this man actually existed, what do we actually know about this man?
Well, I think that that's a very, very hard question. This is where I got to go to Barter Emmer again and say, that would take to lay out that case. You have to write a book.
I
You really
think
do.
that most of the things that are attributed to Jesus, especially the things that he said, if there was a historical Jesus, I mean, you can attribute those things to him that he said, and we know that the things that he did are probably very inaccurate and, as you said, heavily edited. But even if you attribute those things that he said to him, he's still not really saying anything that fantastical that would make you believe in a theological Jesus. He's really just reiterating what was present in his time.
Yeah, agreed. I'm not, even if I was convinced that Jesus absolutely was a historical person, whether anything he said, even if we all agreed those are the things he said, anything he said is still up for debate whether or not that statement is even true. That's a whole separate question.
I'm just going to go with it is very possible that a historical Jesus figure existed, but I'm not going to say that the theological version of Jesus existed, or the commonly held idea of Jesus that existed, whether you believe he was the God-man or not.
Well, I'm just noticing that I'm down to 3% on my laptop's battery here. Oops, I did not grab my plug. It's outside in my shop, so I'm literally about to die.
Maybe you can plug up and be resurrected.
Can I plug one more thing before my battery dies on me?
Go ahead.
The Age of Reason on the Atheist Analysis Network, which you can see in my little thing down here. I'm the co-host of the Age of Reason. It's a multifaceted, science-driven show. We cover a lot of topics, so everyone make sure to go check that out.
And we thank you for appearing on our weekly segment of Reason. Everybody, if you're not familiar with the Foxhole Atheist, you should be. Go check out his videos. Thank you for your service, Sergeant Randy Bevan.
Thank you guys for having me. This was a great conversation. I enjoyed it.
All right.
I've been watching a couple of the episodes leading up to this, though. I've been enjoying a lot of your guys' conversations.
Thanks.
All right. So we have probably Randy leaving here in a few seconds when his battery dies. So we're going to continue on with this week's Hypocrite of the Week.
Cool.
Yes. All right. So this week's Hypocrite of the Week is a rabbi who had an alarm clock camera set up to take videos of the women doing their shower ritual. So I'm going to get this going here and see if you guys can see it and hear it. Let's see here. Google Hangouts. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, we got the screen. Now let's see if we can get volume.
Currently recording women in the ritual showers. It allegedly happened inside Kesher, Israel, which has served as the place of worship for a number of prominent people over the years. News 4's Pat Collins is live in Georgetown with more on this. Pat?
Wendy, a rabbi charged with voyeurism. They say he used a hidden camera in the women's shower at the synagogue. People in Georgetown are talking.
It's obviously horrible.
The crime scene. The Kesher Israel Synagogue in Georgetown.
I think that's kind of despicable.
The crime. According to the police report, voyeurism.
It's horrible. I mean, that's all you can say. It's just absolutely horrible.
The suspect, Dr. Barry Frendel, a 62-year-old rabbi who's been the spiritual leader of the synagogue for 25 years.
That sounds terrible. If that story is true, that's awful.
Rabbi Frendel arrested at his home on O Street in Georgetown this morning. Arrested after police raided the place and seized some computer equipment. I talked to some women who were nearby when it happened.
How many cops?
Five cups?
5 cops?
Yeah.
Five.
And they took out about 5 hard drives.
Hard drive.
Oh, yeah, they took out a lot
They
of
kept bringing them out.
computers.
And did they take out the rabbi?
Yeah.
Well,
Oh,
we
they
did, but we didn't see that.
Really?
Yeah, he was in the back running around.
According to a police report obtained by News 4, a witness says the rabbi installed a hidden camera in the woman's shower at the synagogue. The police report described it as a dream machine, similar to this one, a camera and recorder disguised as a clock radio. According to the witness, the rabbi said he was using it for ventilation in the shower. Now tonight, Rabbi Frendel is in jail. He has a court appearance scheduled tomorrow. Live in Georgetown, Pat Collins, News 4.
All right, so
Wait.
first of all, let me-
Ventilation? What? How?
Right? How does that even
That's
make
my-
sense?
That's my new reason for the alarm clock in my bedroom. It's for ventilation, honey. The
Okay,
alarm-
first, did you guys notice, or was it just me, that this guy seemed very emotionally charged? Sounded like he was almost going to cry reporting this thing.
Yeah, you know
Right.
why? That's because he felt violated. He thinks he saw an alarm clock in the men's bathroom.
All right, so this rabbi, just to give you a
So
little
nuts.
background on him, I've heard that he actually teaches at Towson University, which is approximately less than 10 miles away from me, and a place that I was considering attending school, which this really shouldn't affect it, but it's very interesting because of someone in my local community, and to do these type of things, we shouldn't really be surprised. And the religious people, you shouldn't be surprised when you falsely place your hope and this power in these individuals who are just like everyone else. We do things that we shouldn't do sometimes. We make bad decisions. But you put these people in power and put all of your faith and trust in them, you're always going to be let down. You guys have anything to say about that?
Well, you know, this sexual component in Judaism, I mean, it has a long history. Because I remember there was a story a while ago about a Jewish guy that came forward and was outing a whole bunch of ill practices, like in like the synagogue. What is it, like steam showers or something? Like apparently he walked in on a on a guy that was pretty much just out in the open raping a young boy, just like right there. And like the guy that was raping the boy, like got mad at him because he was going to report him and whatnot. And he and I can't remember the exact story. I know it's online somewhere. But anyways, I mean that it's not really surprising because I mean the amount of cover up that goes on in Judaism and these Abrahamic religion, it just seems to be a common thread between them.
Yeah, and 5 hard drives though. 5 hard drives.
Well, hey, you know what? Video takes up a lot, and if you're going to be a perv, you got to do it right.
Mm.
Yeah, that's always the way though too. Is people can get away with things, and it's always the greed that gets to you, right? It's always you just don't know when to quit. You got people that they can't just rob one bank. They go and they got to rob 10 banks, and then they finally get caught. You got this guy. It's like he's sitting there recording 5 hard drives worth of material. I mean, really? That's a problem. That's a problem.
That's more material than we all have on our YouTube channels combined.
You're just gonna get
Okay.
caught. And it's really unfortunate because Yeah, I mean, things like that, these ritual showers, I mean, that's just, begging for exploitation. And we have, the Catholic priests that are molesting the boys. And you even mentioned, Godless Engineer mentioned about how, these cases where somebody comes into a shower and there's a sexual assault occurring. And, that just completely draws my mind back to the scandal at Penn State University with Jerry Sandusky. People literally walked in on him assaulting these boys, and he was just like, oh, well, you're not going to do anything, right? You're not going to tell anybody. And, and they didn't, because they wanted to protect, the football program, and they wanted to protect Jerry Sandusky himself. And that's kind of, the way with religion too. They want to protect the leaders. They want to protect the name of their church or their religion. And, Jerry Sandusky, his entire operation, his charity was all based around religion too. It was named the Second Mile, so that was a biblical reference. But yeah, I mean, as far as this guy, this rabbi, it's really awful that he would take advantage of people like that. I'm at least glad that he got caught for it, but it just goes to show that you give anybody enough power and enough influence, and it's going to be abused. And you can't be fooled into thinking that because they are religious or believe in God or anything like that, that they're above it, because they're human and they're just as susceptible as anybody else.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of Jerry Sandusky and all that, I actually, in my opinion, the people that help hide these type of people are actually worse than the pedophiles themselves. Because, in my opinion, the pedophiles, they have something mentally wrong with them. Like there's an imbalance chemically in their brains that they don't process like those sexual urges or those sexual fantasies or whatnot. There's something chemically wrong, in their brains with how they process all that. Either something happened early on that changed their chemical makeup in their brain, or whatnot. But while I'm not saying that excuses their behavior, you can definitely blame their behavior. But in my opinion, the ones that don't have that chemical imbalance, right? Those people are actually worse because, and most of the time it is religiously based, because in Christianity you have this idea of forgiveness. And I think that it's actually a very, very dangerous thing, this idea of forgiveness, because what you have is these people that are told that, you need to forgive people in order to get into heaven, or you need to forgive people of trespasses against you, or you need to forgive people of one thing or another in order to be a good person. You're told these things. You're indoctrinated with these ideas. And so when you're encountered with these things, like for instance, walking in on a religious coach that is molesting a young child, and he spouts off, well, I'm not gonna do it anymore. I've asked God for forgiveness or whatnot, or or think of a pastor that does that or something like that. I mean, these people hide them, like they forgive them. And they're like, oh, okay, well, I'll forgive you, and it's between you and God or something like that, and they don't report them, and in that way they help facilitate him, assaulting other kids, and to me that is much worse than the pedophile actually doing, the thing that he doesn't realize is wrong.
Yeah, I think it's complete bullshit. And for being a rabbi with 5 fucking hard drives of video, which is more than the entire Reason panel and anyone that has ever sat in or been a guest on it combined, all the video they have combined is not going to fill 5 hard drives, which I'm sure were not less than 500 gigs. I was actually with Hypocrite of the Week.
Yeah, I was actually kind of wondering like how big they were, because if they were like 1 terabyte, 2 terabytes, I mean that's a lot of video. He's had to have been at it for months.
You know he was going in. Once he got that first 500 gig, he probably went up to 1, 2, and 3, probably even 5. And this lady was saying that he was running around in the back. They came out with the hard drives first, and then went to go get him. Like, what was that all about?
Hiding more hard drives. He's probably got. He's probably. You don't understand. Those were the only 5 that he wasn't able to hide out of the 20 cases that he hid.
That just shows that the world is in a sad state of affairs, and religion is part of the problem. You guys like to say anything else, or just go ahead into outros?
I think I'm good as far as eating up time because I know I like to talk.
All right. Well, I'm Aeolus, your host. As you guys know, we now have a website, the Secular Roundtable. We also have a weekly newsletter that is going to be starting this week, the very first weekly newsletter. Go ahead over there. We'll have the link in the video description, and we're going to retroactively put it in all video descriptions so that everybody has a chance to sign up for this. And it's basically going to be a culmination of everything that we have done that week and what our topic was about, or what our future topic for the following Sunday is going to be about. Let's shoot over to YouTube really quickly. Cristobal Munaz says there is always the possibility that someone or something could have existed. The problem comes when they try to put all this powers and all the crazy shit they say about him also, in quotes, only in the Bible, in quotation. Yes, I think we touched on that pretty well. You know, a lot of people have a hard time discerning the difference between the historical Jesus and the theological Jesus. And then in reference to the Hypocrite of the Week, he says, kinky rabbi, he should be introduced to the interwebs. And that is what we are doing. So as I said, I'm Aeolus. You can follow me at God Works Out. I blog over at religionhurtshumanity.com. I blog there. Check it out. Don't forget to like the Facebook pages, facebook.com/philosophicalatheism and facebook.com/religionhurtshumanity. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And if you find this video anywhere other than my channel, you can find me at youtube.com/GodWorksOut. And especially, don't forget to subscribe to the Prototype Atheist and the Godless Engineer, and like all their Facebook channels and or Facebook pages and their YouTube channels. I know the Godless Engineer has like 10 different groups and pages. I'm still trying to get into all of them.
Yeah, if you just go on Facebook, type Godless Engineer or Godless Engineering into the search bar, you will be able to find me, my page, and my several groups. We have a group almost for everything. Like I said, just go there and find me. I have a Twitter. You can get me there. Instagram, if you want a more personal look at my life. Stalk me and stuff. And then, of course, there's YouTube. Currently, right now, I am doing a series on, Jesus existing, where I go through some pretty good arguments against him existing, as well as rebuttals to things that you might see in the media and whatnot. So please do check me out there. Go there, subscribe, and I'll hand it off to Brendan.
Thanks. I do have to say that I did join the Godless Engineering group a few weeks back, and I've enjoyed being a part of that. And I am Prototype Atheist. You can find me on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, all the usual places. I do videos pretty much focusing on atheism and religion, and I like to bring science into it whenever possible, as I am a molecular biologist. My last video I did was on mitochondrial Eve. So if you're not familiar with that subject matter, go ahead and check that video out. And my next video is also going to be scientifically based as well, and that'll be coming out sometime later this week. Usually I put them out on Thursdays. And then I had a birthday this last week, so if you see a few extra gray hairs in my head here, then you'll know why. But as far as that goes, I got a birthday present here from somebody, and I think you guys will enjoy this. So if you guys can see this here, we got Ray Comfort's Scientific Facts from the Bible. Okay, so I think that this might be some subject material for one of my future videos, and so if you guys are interested in, what I gleaned from this and what I might have to respond to, go ahead and check me out. Make sure you head over to my YouTube channel.
I share your pain because maybe like 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I also received a very horrible book for my birthday, and it was this. I don't know if you can see that.
Hey, and we also don't want to forget to direct people over to the Foxhole Atheist on YouTube. Check out Randy and subscribe to his channel.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think he has a page too on
Those
Facebook.
two. Sorry, yeah. I just wanted to mention real quick that I did an interview with Randy a few weeks back, and that's on my Facebook page as well. So if you want to get him to know him a little bit better, what he's about, you can check that out.
And as always, guys, we would like to thank you for watching. As Godless Engineer says, think skeptically and stay godless. Not sure really what Brennan signs off with. I haven't noticed a trend yet. But, as I like to say, reason.